Good afternoon. My name is Amy Johnson, and I am from the Midwest Manufacturers Association office. We would like to request that you set your virtual name tag with your name and your company name. You can do this by scrolling over your profile video and selecting the three dots in the top right corner and click Rename. Q&A for both the tour and presentation will be held at the end of each. At that time, please feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat feature to submit your questions. This webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour and will be recorded and available on the AMFA website located under the Events tab. I would now like to turn the mic over to our AMFA Board President, Wade Carnes. Wade, you're on mute.
How about now?
Great.
All right, let's try it again. Thanks everybody for attending today. We got a real nice presentation for you from Jim, and we'll be sure to get down to what Laura's got in store for us in her presentation as well. So let's get this meeting started. I'd like to start the meeting by acknowledging some new membership anniversaries for current members. Amy will call up the slideshow here so you can look at it while I'm reading along here. We have some 5-year members, ProTech Engineering, Ely Memorial High School, and Great River Energy. We have 10-year members, Clifton Larson Ellen and Alinex. 15-year members, Arrowhead Product Development and Apex, and 20-year members, Minnesota Power, Department of Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitations, Hydro Solutions, and National Bank of Commerce. So congratulations to all them, and thanks for your continued support. Then we have some new members that we'd like to highlight that have joined in 2020. We have Boudry Oil and Propane, Cabs, ROPS, and Attachments, Giant Voices, Han Financial, Headwater Strategic Succession Consulting, Innovational Water Solutions, Production Workforce Professionals, Range Steel Fabricators. We got a little bit of an announcement on what AMFA board has been up to. We've been working this year on trying to come up with ways to add more value to our membership. And one of the things we've been talking about is having a actual rep for the AMFA area. So we'd have boots on the ground, it'd be a point of contact, and we're really pushing hard trying to get this up and running. And I really hope it does work the way that we envision it. So, and also I'd like to mention that if anybody has any other ideas on how we can boost what we get to the members and what would add more value, we'd love to hear about it. Okay, then we'll introduce Jim Petruga from Fraser Shipyards and NECO Solutions. They're a 100-year-old maritime company based out of Superior, Wisconsin. NECO Industrial combines the machine talents of Northern Engineering with the steel fabrication expertise of Fraser Shipyards to create gearbox rebuilds, machinery rebuilds, vibration analysis, motion application, and pump rebuilds. For 5.5 years, NECO has been working with the industrial market, all the steel that is going on the boats, the similar equipment that is used throughout the AMFA territory for mining, grain, and even with some of the manufacturing facilities. Jim Petruga has been with Fraser since 2015. He works with the industrial customers for their fabrication, machining, and equipment building needs. Jim's prior experience includes positions in general and operations management for a large North American-based textile rental and processing company, and he is accustomed to working with customers that manage a wide variety of processes and require great services to run their businesses. So now I'll turn it over to Jim.
Hello, everyone. If you could, hey, Wade, could you hear me verbally?
Yep.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for, thank you for logging on today to see the presentation. I'm just getting my screen share going here. It'll take me just a moment. And is that popping in?
Looks good, Jim.
Looks good. All right, thank you. Actually, the first screen that I've got here is totally unrelated to Fraser Shipyards. I was in North Dakota yesterday, and I happened to catch. Looking up in the rising sun, I could see the skies. Portions of the sky were dark. The geese are migrating in North Dakota, and so I saw, basically what was a black shadow that extended for miles. That was just tens of, or I don't know the quantity, but it was just kind of awe-inspiring to see, this amount of, that quantity of birds making their way. So, but now on to, more specific about work here. Fraser Industries is a group of 4 companies that includes Fraser Shipyards, Lake Assault Boats, Northern Engineering, and most recently, we've added a brand called NECO Industrial. And NECO is really, because if you look at the 3 other company names, they have a maritime focus. And we realized that there's a lot of the equipment that we work on and the work that we do is also relates to a lot of industrial companies in the area that are in mining, paper, some of the sugar beet processing plants. Any place where you see smokestacks and conveyors are potential customers for NECO Industrial. It's, if you look at the material handling systems and the steel fabrication work that's required, it's all very similar to what's required by the dry bulk carrier industry that sails in and out of the harbor. Here's a picture of, Fraser Shipyards has been operating from the same location since 1888. The picture that you see here is from 1960. So you can see the shipyard in the foreground, a number of boats that are parked for work. And in the background, you can see what is the beginning of the High Bridge. And that was built in 1960, opened in 1961. You can see the hillside of Duluth in the background. Moving on here to some of the, some samples of work in process. This is a picture that's from inside the dry dock, and it shows a Army Corps of Engineers barge that was in for maintenance and below the waterline work. And you can see where it's painted up and about ready to go again. All of the boats that come into the dry dock, you see the block pattern along the bottom here. A block pattern that's appropriate for the vessel that's coming in will be laid in place so that they can float a boat in, pump the water down, and then it'll set on the dry dock. Somebody's got some feedback going. Is that improved now?
Yep.
Okay.
We're good.
One piece of fabrication work that's in process right now is you can see that there's the top and bottom of a boat that's going to be sailing on the Missouri River. It's a casino boat, and you can see the hull on the bottom, and you can see the upper deck structure on the top. This is a casino boat that'll sail on the Missouri River. It's being made at Fraser, and truckable size modules will be taken to the Missouri River, so it'll go by truck. And then these pieces will be put together and it'll be side launched into the river and go into service. You can see how it's kind of being made to have almost like an old riverboat look to it, where you can see like the outline of what a paddle wheel, to make it look like a fake paddle wheel. But the casino will be on the main deck, and then up above is the pilot house. So all the steel work was done by Fraser. All of the aluminum work on the upper pilot house was done by Lake Assault. Here's a new picture of what Fraser looks like. It's a new version of what you saw in the background, where you see there's a Coast Guard boat that's in the dry dock, new office building, but it's and the makeup of the dock face and some of the other amenities at the yard have changed over the years, but it's 60 acres behind a fence. They've been operating from the same location for over 130 years. Back to talking about the Coast Guard, you can see for those of you who have never seen inside a dry dock, a lot of people drive by, but seeing down in the dry dock is kind of amazing. You can see the blocking structure that's required to hold some of the more complicated geometries on the bottom of the Coast Guard boats. When these boats are pulled into the dry dock, they'll actually have a diver who is in the water, making sure that as that water is being pumped down, that the vessel's going to hit all the blocks correctly. It's very important to make sure that that's done carefully. Some of the work that when people drive through through Duluth and Superior in the wintertime, quite often you'll see boats that are parked either at Fraser or at different locations around the harbor. Typically, you'll see if a boat is parked here for the winter, it's being worked on by the staff at Fraser and Northern Engineering. A lot of the work that's done by the vessels parked around the harbor, and you see an example of it here, is that people we will do cargo hold replacement or plate steel replacement in the cargo holds. Taconite's very abrasive, so when the boats come in and are parked, the staff at Fraser will go through and take UT thickness surveys of different parts of the cargo holds. They'll provide that information back to the owners. Then the owners will formulate a plan of how much of the plate they would like to have replaced. It's an ongoing process, but you drive through and you'll see a boat parked somewhere around Duluth and Superior, but you'll see a crane parked there, and you'll see a group of pickup trucks. So the crane's moving material in and out, and the pickup trucks are moving people and the supplies that are needed to do the work. Some of the non-maritime work that's been done by Fraser, you see, for anybody who's familiar with Pier B or has been over by the new Pier B Hotel, this is a bridge. By design, they wanted it to look like an old railroad trestle. So the handrail's made of weathering steel, has rivets in it, but that's a retractable bridge that can open and close so that smaller passenger boats or pleasure boats can move in and out of the parking area that's out next to Pier B. Down here in the lower left-hand corner, it's a water tank that was made for a mining facility that'll go on the back of one of the haul trucks. That tank weighs over 70,000 pounds, and it was delivered by truck and was over 24 feet wide on the trailer. And then in the lower right-hand corner, you see a 50-foot section of an exhaust stack for an industrial facility in the area. Some of the equipment that we've got in place to do this work, in the upper left-hand corner, this is a new piece of equipment for Fraser. It's called an angle roll. You'll see sometimes with decorative steel or where you need something that is not a straight I-beam or a straight piece of structural steel. This machine in the upper left-hand corner can roll a variety of shapes of material, and it's a fairly stout machine. It can roll and shape material that is up to 4 inches by 4 inches square, like what we'd call a square bar. So it'd be a solid piece of steel 4x4. I-beams much bigger than that. That piece of equipment was bought to support some of the new vessel construction that's taking place at Fraser right now. The upper right-hand corner shows the plasma table. It's a 40-foot cutting table. They can position larger pieces of material on it when needed. The lower left-hand corner is the CNC mill that we've got in Northern that is used for a number of purposes. We've got a lot of CNC equipment at Northern, and we're fortunate to have a good group of skilled technicians that, for the most part, have been here steadily from I met them when I started here, and they're all still here, is what I'm trying to say. Lower right-hand corner, it's a large water jet table that was put in at Northern. It's an Omax 80X. It's a state-of-the-art water jet that has a cutting envelope of 6.5 feet by 13.5 feet. It's pretty large in the whole water jet world. Just a photo of what sometimes you never know what you're going to see at Fraser when it changes on a day-to-day basis. but there's a couple of dry bulk carriers that are stored. Actually, the one on the right is the museum boat, the Irvin from Duluth. And then the blue vessel sitting there is the Ranger 3 that runs from Houghton, Michigan out to Isle Royale. I don't know, one of the interesting companies that operates over at the Fraser facility is called Lake Assault Boats. And they, Lake Assault started back in the 80s in the St. Cloud area as a manufacturer of custom walleye fishing boats. During the economic downturn of 2008, the company was down to employing 3 people, and they were purchased by Fraser Industries, and they moved the company and the people up to Superior, Wisconsin, and they found a niche market in making boats for public safety. So they manufacture patrol boats, firefighting boats, and in 2017 they were involved with fabricating all of the passenger barges for the city of San Antonio. San Antonio's got the Riverwalk area, which is a huge tourist draw, and they recognized that their fleet of passenger barges was old and in need of updating, and it's a successful program for them. So they contracted with Lake Assault to manufacture 43 barges. They're all electric powered by lithium-ion battery packs, and so they've got 43 of them running in the area down there, and it's been a very successful. It was a good project for Lake Assault, and the city of San Antonio is very happy. Here's a sample of some of the boats that are made for firefighting purposes. And you'll see boats anywhere between 22 and 36 feet long that come out of Lake Assault for public safety. Some will look like this, some will be a little bit simpler. They had one interesting project that came up a few years ago was for Hennepin County. They needed a couple of patrol boats that would be able to run on the upper Mississippi River. And they had a design requirement that the boats had to be able to plane off and run in a foot of water. So they were able to employ a tunnel hull. You mounted the outboard motor on a jack plate, and they were able to meet the criteria for the boat to plane in a foot of water. And that, I believe, was a 22-foot boat. And they, here's a picture that shows a couple of different things. You can see what one of the boats looks like when it's in process in the right picture, and in the lower picture. Everything that's made at Lake Assault, they start with sheet aluminum. It's cut, it is all welded and assembled, and all of the electronics and all of the systems that are involved in the finished boat are all designed, spec'd by, and installed by the staff at Lake Assault. In the upper left-hand corner, there's it's a prototype boat that was made for a large company that was taken down to the Miami Boat Show. And it's a high-speed, it's a tri-hull, kind of a tri-tune type design that was designed to run or to be propelled by a larger electric motor and battery pack similar to what's used in an electric car. And it was one of the manufacturers wanted to see if there was a maritime application for their drive systems. I thought it was, I was so impressed with the boat when I saw it in the shop. I thought it'd be fun to have a boat like that and take it, either on the river system or one of the popular lakes in the area. And I think if you had a boat like that, that looked like that was going 30 miles an hour across the water and had no outboard motor and was almost silent going across the water, I thought that people would find that pretty interesting. I don't know if that one's gonna go into production at some time or not. On to Northern Engineering. Northern supports, Northern has been operating out of the same location in Superior since 1916. And we're about a mile west of the shipyard. Northern is part of the Fraser Industries family of companies. Northern and Fraser have been co-owned since the 1940s, and they've been owned by the Capstan Corporation since the 1970s. But anything with a bearing on it on a boat, including propulsion systems, steering systems, material handling systems, all of the gear-driven equipment, is all work done by the staff at Fraser. And you see examples of some of the gearboxes before and after, or some that are in process here. A lot of these gearboxes will go into service for anywhere between 3 and 15 years at a time. They need to be taken out of service, rebuilt, and they can be put back into service for a like type interval. And that can happen several times over. The crew at Northern is very skilled in this regard. They've been trained. They've gone to school with different OEMs, and they're familiar with working with a lot of different brands of equipment here. You see an open gearbox on the top, some of the open exposed gears. On the truck, on the drop bed truck in the lower left-hand corner, that's a picture of a right angle drive, and you can see that this would be mounted in a Great Lakes bulk carrier. This is what would drive either a stern or a bow thruster. And you can see where the blades would mount on the hub. They're covered with plates right now, but that would be mounted in the tunnel below the water line. That's what would help move the boat right or left whenever needed, if it's running in the river system or for docking purposes. And then you can see a couple of the guys working on a laptop by the mill. We also work with customers we do some inspection work. And this is a group of people who are looking at a large bull gear that turns a lime kiln out in the Red River Valley area. And these are customers who, when their equipment is running 10 months a year, they don't have any downtime. But they like to pre-plan and assess what the condition of their equipment is. So we'll go through and we'll have people do, we'll gather photography, take measurements, do some non-destructive testing of the gear to make sure that it's, so that we can assess the condition of the gear and the gear face, to make sure that everything's in good shape, so that if they need to plan for a replacement, they can plan for that a year or years in advance, and they have peace of mind that when they're in their operating season, that they're not very likely to have a surprise breakdown or a surprise gear failure. These types of gears are not off the shelf, and the lead time for them is usually measured in to be very close to a year, or sometimes in it'll take up to 2 years to get a gear like that from the time it's ordered. Wanted to show you a picture inside the dry dock, showing what some of the people from Northern Engineering will do. You see the rudder assembly here on a Great Lakes carrier. It's being suspended by a number of chain falls. So if they need to do work on on part of the rudder assembly, the rudder post, they can drop that down, remove the rudder. They can do any internal or external machining that's required, get everything repaired, and then they'll move the rudder in, start with a crane, hang it into place, and then it's like a series of transfers. It's like a trapeze act using the chain falls to get the rudder lowered into place, to get it installed, and to get the alignments correct. You can also see the group of people that are here working around the rear hub of the boat. Most of these are variable pitch props, and the hubs are, there's just a lot of gears, gears that will adjust the pitch of the prop as needed to go forward or reverse. A picture of inside the shop at Northern, showing a couple of gearboxes in process, one early on, one that is completed and painted and ready to go. This is, we have a lot of portable equipment at Northern, because to do repair work on the boats, it's easier to be able to have equipment that you can take and do the work in place on the boat, because it's expensive and time consuming if you try to remove something. This is a picture showing the rudder tube of a tugboat that's being machined in place. We've got a lot of portable, a lot of very stout portable boring equipment here for performing tasks like that. And you can see the chips are falling down to the mounting plate down below. Conveyor systems, we do a lot of work with some of the dry material handlers in the area at the ore docks. This shows, you can see on that one, there's a welded surface that's being machined back down. The bearing on that pulley had failed and spun on the shaft. It damaged the shaft. So the common repair process for that is to clean it up. You'll do a welded fill of material, and then you'll machine it back down to the original diameter so that the bearing can be installed, and that pulley is ready to go for a whole, for another service interval. Gearboxes, sometimes it is necessary to correct the bore in the gearbox. Sometimes those holes will egg out or become deformed over time, but that's another one where you can do a welded fill to replace the material that was lost, and then you can machine the bore back to the OEM spec. And here we've got two machines that are installed and doing the same thing. Picture of Roger and Julia working in the shop. They're rebuilding a Dodge shaft-mounted gearbox here. Technology and predictive maintenance are growing. We're doing more and more of that work. So we have vibration analysis capabilities. We have people who are trained vibration techs. This video that's running right now, it shows the output of a new system that's used. It's called the RDI Motion Amplification System. It's a system that was purchased by Northern, and it's used for more difficult vibration and structural looseness problems. It's a high-speed video camera and a laptop system that can be used to diagnose and measure motion. You can take vibration readings from the video playback. You don't have to touch the equipment, and that's a big change. And then some of the playback that you're seeing here, it is the motion is amplified up to 50 times, so that things that are normally not visible to the naked eye, you can see and understand how equipment is shaking, moving, and how different pieces of equipment are moving in relation to one another. And this has been very well received by a lot of customers in the area in assessing structural looseness on a smaller machine foundation like this. But it can be also be used to do the analysis of bridges and whole structures. Just kind of a summary picture here showing some of the the work that each of the companies does with the gearbox. They'll look on one of the lake assault boats, and then from the deck of one of the dry bulk carriers. This is a picture of a boat that's in process at Fraser right now. It's a 140-foot car ferry that's going to sail on Lake Erie. And the picture on the right shows it near completion in the dry dock. The picture on the left is the initial artist's rendering when the boat was being designed. And actually this one, I'll have to get that corrected. This also shows a smaller boat that Lake Assault is making. It's called a rigid hull inflatable. And then on the right picture, it shows one of the barges being delivered to San Antonio. It's an urban area, so they just parked a crane on top of a bridge deck, and they brought the flatbed trucks through one at a time. I think I'm running pretty close to time here. Any questions by anyone?
Thank you, Jim. We do have a few questions. I have a few questions that came in on chat, and if anyone wanted to unmute themselves also, please feel free. First off, Thank you very much. That was fascinating and pretty awesome that we get to see that virtually when we don't often get to travel to see these sites. First question, now, do you generally work in the USA or are you worldwide?
Generally, we work in the United States.
Okay. Another question, what training and skills are needed for your employees?
For the people who are working at Fraser, we're looking for people who have gone through and trained as a welder. And with Fraser, a lot of our, most of our people have gone through a 1 or 2 year trade school to be trained as a welder. We have about somewhere between 80 and 100 people that are year-round employees at Fraser. It flexes up to about 300 during the winter months for all of the winter repair work that's done. And a lot of the people who come in to work during the winter shutdown season are Boilermakers who are out doing field work in the summer months. And then they come in to work at Fraser when the construction season is, or when there's no construction work. Northern Engineering, we're looking for machinists and mechanics. So a lot of people who are working at Northern have gone to a 2-year tech school and are trained as machinists.
Thank you. How many ships do you typically work on in a year? And how long does it usually take on average?
That's a great question. I don't know what the quantity of ships that are worked on here, so I won't even guess because I'd guess wrong. As far as the time of the repair, one service that we offer for our customers is that our people will go out and work on the boats and do a lot of the repair work in place. Sometimes we can complete the repair when the boat's being loaded in the harbor. And there's other times where, if it's part of the material handling system and the vessel's loaded and they want to maintain the schedule, our people will sail with the boat and complete the repair while the boat's underway to the unloading point. And our crew will either unload the boat at the Soo Locks, or they'll ride the boat all the way to the unload point, and they'll be met by a truck and brought home.
Thank you.
Same for the people at Fraser. There's some weld and repair work that's done when vessels are underway.
Thank you. Another question that came in, can you expand a bit more on the Navy contract awarded to Lake Assault, and how significant is that for Lake Assault and our region?
It is very significant. Oh gosh, it's a multi-year contract to fabricate smaller patrol boats for the Navy. They've begun. They've got a few of them that one that's been completed, a few that are in process. It has caused Fraser to continue to hire people, and they've taken an old building at Fraser on the west side of the property, and they have taken what was an old storage building and they have turned it into a specialty fabrication line just for the Navy boats, so that they can move through a high volume of boats and meet the Navy expectations. Everybody at Fraser is thrilled about this. It's going to mean year-round employment for more people, and it's a long-term win for Fraser and Lake Assault.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jim. Are there any other final questions from the crowd? All right. I will turn it over to you, Wade.
All right. Thank you, Amy. And I want to say thank you to Jim for putting that wonderful presentation together for us today. It was very much appreciated. Right now, I'd like to introduce our moderator today for Laura Bordelon's presentation, and that is Jeff Borling. Jeff joined Great River Energy's economic development team in June of 2016, and he works primarily in the northern half of the service area from North Branch to Northholm and from Park Rapids to Grand Portage. Prior to joining Great River Energy, Jeff served as Director of Industrial Economic Development for the Duluth Seaway Port Authority and spent 7 years with the Area Partnership for Economic Expansion at Apex, where he helped to drive regional investment activity and job growth in northern Minnesota and northwest Wisconsin. So Jeff, take it away.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Wade. Thanks, everybody. It's good to be back hanging out with AMFA. Some of my fond memories from serving on the board and participating, especially in some of the legislative affairs work that AMFA engages in, going down to the Capitol and really tracking those issues and highlighting those priorities that are of importance to manufacturers. So happy to help lead the Q&A, but first and foremost, I want to introduce Laura Bordelon, who will be giving us a great presentation on what you can expect in the upcoming session. And Laura Bordelon is the Senior Vice President for Advocacy at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, a position she has held since November of 2011. She leads the organization's public policy, grassroots, and political engagement strategies. She's a Duluth native, which we all love to hear, and a University of Minnesota graduate. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Laura take it away, and looking forward to the presentation.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everybody. That was, Jim, I loved that presentation. I've never seen a dry dock before, but I'll tell you, my favorite boat is the Paul Tregurtha. I don't know if you've ever worked on that big boat, but I'm happy when I'm home, and every time I see it come through, it's so spectacular.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to go through kind of a couple of different things here. I want to give you a quick update on the elections, and more importantly, what it means for the business community, and talk a little bit about what we see going ahead for this year. So first thing is just kind of trying to get our arms around this crazy big election that we just had. And our sense is that what people really voted for was divided government. So it's fascinating that both at the federal level and at the state level, voters voted a lot the same. So there's a narrower majority in the US Congress and the US Senate. And similarly in Minnesota, there's a narrower majority in the US, in the Minnesota House and the Minnesota Senate. So the way that we read that is that there's no clear mandate for either side. This is a message for elected officials to compromise and get things done. And I think above all, what we've gleaned is that this is the election, and increasingly on people's minds are how we're going to deal with the pandemic and its impact on the economy. The other thing that's really important, and I have a really great chart at the end of this presentation about split control of the legislature, is that all the parties have a seat at the redistricting table. I don't know if you remember this or are aware of this, but every 10 years, based on the population changes, states have to go through and change the congressional boundary lines. So that will be on the docket for this year's legislature. So just a quick snapshot of what the Minnesota House and Minnesota Senate look like. Going forward for the next 2 years, there's a 1-seat majority in the Minnesota Senate. The Republicans will continue to control it. They did before this election, and they'll keep on. The 2 seats that they flipped were in Austin and Lakeville. So a greater Minnesota seat and a suburban metro seat. The Democrats flipped 3 seats in St. Cloud, in Plymouth, and in Burnsville. And 3 of these seats were under 1,000 votes, which is considered relatively close in Senate districts, which are larger than House districts. And then on the House side, whoops, I'm sorry, back up. On the House side, the Democrats didn't pick up any seats, but the Republicans picked up 5. So that majority, as I mentioned, got narrower. Some of those seats were in greater Minnesota, some were in the metro area. And there's 1 seat that I'm aware of that is still being contested, and that's the Hibbing seat. That was, at the last count I saw, I think it was under 50 votes. 50 votes is the kind of vote total that could change. That's close enough. And that seat is currently held by Julie Sandsteed. So as they recount it, we'll be able to give you a better sense of if that's going to change or if it'll stay the same. So the important question for us with these election results is what it means for employers. I just did a tick list of the compromises that were made in the previous session under divided government. And frankly, it worked out pretty well for all of us. The statewide business property tax was reduced. There had been proposals by the House Democrats to increase taxes by up to $12 billion. Those were not enacted. There was a big hot debate, and it'll come back again next year, on how to deal with insurance costs. As employers, I'm sure you struggle with this. We hear it from all of our members that this is a top they want to continue to offer the benefit if they can, but it's becoming increasingly expensive and hard to do. So everybody's watching their insurance costs. And a couple of years ago, there was a proposal to offer a reinsurance model, which helped bring down the cost of premiums. That was a Republican proposal, and on the Democrat side, there was a public option proposal. Governor Walz also championed this, and it was to create another choice for folks who wanted to seek lower insurance rates. The challenge with that public option is that it's very disruptive to rural hospitals. They're not reimbursed at the same level. So there's some cost shifting that happens between public insurance versus private insurance, where the private side ends up picking up more of the costs simply because on the public side, they don't pay as much as the private side. So there's some concern to be watched there. The other hot debate that happened last session was, should we increase the gas tax to pay for more road and bridge repair? I think Governor Walz had a 20-cent proposal. Folks in the legislature balked at that and instead pulled money out of the general fund to pay for road and bridge repairs. The other big topic that we spent a ton of time on last session was this whole notion of new workplace mandates. Duluth has a mandate on private sector employers. Minneapolis and St. Paul does, for offering earned sick and safe time. Even if you offer a certain benefit, these cities have said you have to offer our benefit in exactly the way that we structure it. We talked to a lot of members, and they expressed a lot of concerns about this, not only because it could displace other benefits that they offer. Somehow, depending upon how they're structured, it could also be a big cost. Last year's proposal was for a 24-week paid sick and safe leave for both yourself as well as somebody that you're caring for in your family. And it evolved from a shared cost between employers and employees to an employer-only payroll tax. So we had voiced a lot of opposition to that proposal. The other thing that we made progress on was environmental permitting, where a lot of you folks are located. There's a lot of big economic development projects that are hanging in the balance and that we're hoping that they get approved and finalized. They're all caught up in environmental permitting rules and regulations and litigation. We chip away at that every chance we can to make it more efficient so that people who want to invest in our state know that there's a decision at the end of a timely and sometimes overly complicated process. I would say, I think all of us value the natural resources in our state. I know business does, because it's a great way to attract employees, and makes for a wonderful lifestyle for us here, but we need to have a more efficient system than we do. It's very, very time consuming and very expensive. And the other thing we made a little progress on was reducing workers' compensation medical costs, which is always something that we keep an eye on. As medical costs increase, so do the work comp insurance amounts. So looking forward with this split legislature, these are the issues that they are going to be debating. And I'm sure you're all well familiar with the fact that we've been running a state budget deficit since the pandemic. We were doing fine. And then after February, revenues just fell off as businesses were closed, as people were unemployed and shopping less. It's been pretty devastating to the state budget. The last kind of official projected forecast that the state released showed a $4.7 billion deficit. And as you probably know, unlike Congress, the states have to balance their budget every 2 years. So this is going to be the big to-do item for everybody in the legislature, is trying to figure out, how do we resolve this budget deficit? It might be lower than that projected amount as the economy kind of resumes or gets back on its feet. That generates more sales tax, more income tax, more corporate tax, and that might bring that deficit down, but they still have to figure it out. So the question, I think, facing the legislators is, what will they do? There's about a $2 billion budget surplus, which is a very healthy, in fact, it's a record high level amount of funds. They can tap that. There's always talk about a federal stimulus. They could potentially access federal funds if it comes through. Of course, they could go to tax increases. We hope they don't do that, because there's a lot of high tax levels in Minnesota already. They could contemplate spending cuts in some of their budget accounts that they have now. And the other thing that I think is something to keep an eye on is potentially legalizing recreational marijuana. I don't know if any of you saw this, but South Dakota in the last election actually approved by ballot measure, I think, use of recreational marijuana. That apparently throws off a lot of revenue. It has in places that have legalized it. So I would be very surprised if we didn't see a legislative proposal to do that. The other issues, obviously, that we're all still dealing with and that the legislature is going to have to sort out is the ongoing response and health crisis rising from the pandemic. There are, especially in the metro area, there's a lot of high concern still about racial disparities, policing, and any of the unresolved issues around the death of George Floyd that happened Memorial Day weekend. And then the other COVID-related thing, because everything seems to be wrapped up with COVID right now, is how we're all functioning and doing different business differently and what that means for the state budget. So, for example, a lot of people working from home and not driving, so that drives down gas tax revenues. So there's less money for roads and bridges. Commercial property, will there be a big change with remote work so people aren't using office space in the same way? And then what happens to the property taxes that are thrown off from those properties? The next issue is housing. There's a housing shortage, workforce and affordable housing across our state. And the other, one of the other issues that we are sure we'll see is a debate about broadband funding. As more people work remotely, as kids are learning remotely, will there be more investments in broadband to make it easier for us all to continue to function that way? And then in healthcare, we'll be back to this whole debate about a public option, or should we renew the reinsurance premium that was approved a couple of years ago? That will need attention in the next session. Some other kind of second tier but important issues is energy. There was a very, very hot debate about energy last session. A lot of interest in moving away from fossil fuels altogether, everything from pipelines to home heating use, transportation fuels, electric vehicles are a hot topic in a lot of circles. We don't really have a very built out infrastructure for electric vehicles. So one of the debates at the legislature will be, should we invest in chargers and stations for people to charge their cars and make that part of our public infrastructure? And then there's always a debate, it seems every couple of years, about should we mandate additional renewable energy use? The other piece, as I mentioned before, is that we're expecting more workplace mandates. These are very hot topics across the country, especially in the coastal states where some of them have actually enacted some of these things. Paid leave in the context of COVID will be back. There are some kind of aggressive ideas that we see coming from California and Washington State and New York State about non-compete agreements for employees, the state dictating what board compositions should look like, as well as executive pay. And then the other kind of really technical and nuanced issue is consumer privacy. The state of Washington and state of California have been debating how consumer data should be used. And the interesting thing about this is that it impacts employers and employee data. It's an emerging issue and we're watching it closely. We want to make sure that people's data use is protected and that employer interests are considered. And then the other dynamic outside of the legislature is what the new Biden administration will do. There's a lot of things that a president can do either through executive order. I read an article this morning about the possibility that he'll consider shutting down some of the pipelines, Dakota Access and Keystone, that have been very politically charged over the past few years and what that would mean. There are other things, use of forests, use of other natural resources, mining potentially. I won't get into specifics because I didn't know enough about it, but there's all kinds of things that presidents can do through executive orders that may have impact on the economic recovery of the state too. So the other big issue that I want to touch on also is redistricting, as I mentioned kind of at the top. There's been a lot of population shifts in our state over the past 10 years, and you can see some of the challenges. So on the left-hand column, these are where we've seen big population increases in Minnesota, is basically in the western suburbs and the suburban ring, and similarly really large decreases in parts of northern Minnesota as well as western and southern Minnesota. Somehow the legislature needs to balance out these population changes so that you're getting adequate representation across all of these districts. What it might mean is collapsing or shrinking down a couple of districts now and expanding others. So for example, what they might do, and this is, I don't know why this particular part of the state is brought up all the time, but probably because there's been some significant population losses for Senator Bach and Senator Tomassoni and former Senator Eric Simonson's districts, perhaps those would become 2 districts instead of 3. Similarly, down in southern Minnesota, you start to collapse a couple of those more rural districts. It will be a very, very contentious debate. Frankly, the legislature has had a tough time getting a redistricting map passed. The courts have been deciding this for, I think, the past 30 or 40 years. Nevertheless, both sides will have a chance to weigh in on what they think would be a fair map. And we think that's important, is for the legislature to take a run at figuring out what the districts should be. Just one more point, not only will this cover the legislative districts, but it also defines the congressional districts as well. So because of population changes, we may have a change in the number of congressional representatives that we have for Minnesota. This is the other map that I wanted to show you, or the chart. The bottom 2 lines are the Minnesota Senate. That shows kind of the change back and forth between control, red line being Republicans, blue line being Democrats, and the upper bars crossing is the Minnesota House, where you can see some of the changes in control. And the reason I wanted to share this with you is because I think it shows that there are a lot of competitive districts in our state, swing districts, people call them. And the advantage of swing or competitive districts is they keep things somewhat fair and even. You know, for many years, you'll have Republicans representing a certain part of a state for a really long period of time. Similarly, you'll have Democrats representing a part of the state or the region for a really long period of time. And these swing districts really influence who's in control or not. So all of this to say, the maps have been pretty fair in Minnesota over the past 10 or 15 years, and we're hopeful that they continue to be, versus some of the more interesting gerrymandering that we've seen in other states. We really don't have that here. And if the legislature draws the maps, or if the courts draw the maps, we don't expect to see that much difference. We think they'll come up with a fair map because, frankly, that's what we deserve, and that's been the tradition in our state. So we're optimistic about that, but this will be a big political brawl, because it will mean some people may have their seat removed, or they may be crowded with another person who's already serving, and that's always really awkward for elected officials to be nested together when they have their own districts. So with that, I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you have about what's been happening this session, what to expect for next session, any other questions that come to mind. I'm happy to take a crack at them.
Right, so as has been the practice here, I encourage everyone to unmute if you'd like to just speak up and interrupt with a question. Otherwise, you can type that into the chat. You know, I'll kick us off. I know we've got a couple in the chat for a minute as we wait for a few more. I'll just kick us off. Laura, you mentioned COVID, and obviously we're all watching the headlines with hospitals filling up, and the governor just announced some new measures trying to restrict the spread. What are you seeing on the horizon for future shutdowns?
That is, you know, we talk about almost every day at the chamber is you know, the fear and concern that more things will be shut down. My sense is the governor is going to let the schools make decisions about if they're going to stay in person, hybrid learning, whatever they're doing. I think the governor will continue to let the school districts make that call. His announcement yesterday is really interesting because it allows, this was kind of lost in the private gatherings news, but he's going to allow retail to go back to 100% of their capacity. Really good timing with the holidays and holiday shopping and all of that. And they need it. You know, our Main Street businesses really need to be open. These folks know how to do this in a safe way. Everybody wants to stay open, and they're very conscientious about what they're doing to protect their staff and their customers. The bars and restaurants are a whole different piece. And I do worry a lot about our hospitality industry. It's been hard for them. This kind of additional restriction about not serving food past 10 p.m., not allowing people to stand. You have to be seated at a booth. You know, the restrictions are hard. And we totally appreciate that the governor is trying to limit community spread, but we do worry a lot about these businesses. I think we will probably stay under a requirement to work remotely if you can. I think that's linked to schools. And hopefully, because employers have been doing such a good job of not increasing spread and taking all the necessary steps, there won't be any further business shutdowns. But the caseload is really growing fast, and it is definitely something that we worry about.
I know it's been a tale of two pandemics, with some of our businesses being essential and have continued business as usual, more or less. For those that have been affected, do you anticipate any new funding or recovery legislation of that sort?
Yeah, good question. I would be surprised if folks in the hospitality industry didn't ask for some sort of recovery package. But in terms of small business grants and loans, they did that at the end of last session, and it was the number of people that applied, it swamped the system immediately. So there's still obviously a lot of need out there. And I think, Jeff, the other question is, will there be another PPP type of program coming out of the federal government? So the state might wait to see if federal money comes first, because that's the easier money to access. But I believe there will be legislative proposals to help small businesses. I think it's probably necessary again this session.
Excellent. We do have a question here in the chat from Jim. The question reads, is the state government considering a holistic approach with energy? It is necessary to build generating and transmission infrastructure to support the proposed transitions. You see it as a holistic approach that we're seeing with state government?
No, I see it as a preferenced approach. I really think there's a lot of folks in the legislature that want to accelerate to green renewable energy as fast as possible. We have raised a lot of very valid concerns with them about making sure that large industrial users aren't negatively impacted. There's a lot of industries, manufacturing is a sweet spot for this, that take a lot of power. And we want to make sure that the state isn't setting policies that make these prices become just really uncompetitive for businesses in Minnesota. And then the next question, so it's not just the way the power is generated, it's also how you do the transmission. And what we've heard from a lot of our energy members is that there's a lot of congestion on the lines with renewables. Renewables are intermittent, and that you need to build additional transmission. So we are clearly in kind of a new moment with energy policy. And our goal will be to argue you've got to make the rates as competitive as possible, so we retain as much of our heavy manufacturing and heavy industry users as we can in our state. It is a burdensome cost for them, and we talk to them about it a lot. So that's a really good question. Thank you for that one.
Yeah, I'll just throw it on a flip side of that. We've seen Elon Musk and Tesla calling for ramped up nickel production. I know Talon Metals and Tamarack is branding the term, or just trademarked the term, green nickel. And they're proposing their mine can rise to meet that need from new electric vehicles. So are we going to see a strange new symbiosis between mining in Minnesota, mining advocates, and EV, renewable energy battery storage advocates?
Yeah, it'd be great. It would be great. Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah, or it'll just be Iron Range against the 6-1 tours forever, as I always get. Oh.
We need the, I mean, if legislators are being honest, the fact that we can do this in Minnesota, generate value for Minnesota, and do it in a more environmentally sustainable and safe way, that seems like a win-win. But I know there's a lot of strong feelings on all sides about natural resources now, and it's one of the reasons I flagged as a concern, what President Biden's administration might do on some of these executive orders, because it would be great to keep building and keep growing in these key parts of the state.
Yeah, mining and renewable energy can't have one without the other. That's either an opportunity or a challenge. We'll find out. So Okay, well, we all know Minnesota's got a reputation for being a high tax state. What sort of tax increases or tax policy changes should manufacturers be watching out for in the next legislative session?
I'm voting for none, but realistically, I think, I think there's some go-to places for legislators that they've gone to enough times that we kind of expect them to. It's mostly on foreign earnings. These are really complex tax policy considerations, but they've gone there in the past to try to do additional assessments on any foreign earnings. We do have high taxes. We have high property taxes. We have high sales taxes. We have high individual income taxes. We have high corporate taxes. So, and they juiced those taxes really high in the 2013 deficit. So I'm hoping that they will recognize we're top 10 in a number of different categories, and that new taxes isn't always the way to go. That's, to be honest with you, that's why I think the marijuana legalization will be very attractive to them. But it's, I think the governor had said publicly, taxes will be on the table. So I'm very reluctant to make a prediction on this, because I'm hopeful that they'll look at some, maybe some budget growth restraints and some other sources other than increasing taxes for Minnesota companies. That's certainly what we'll argue.
So I'm going to pause here to check the chat, give someone an opportunity. If anybody wants to jump in, speak up, take yourself off mute. Well, maybe I'll just end. Oh, go ahead, Ian. Is that you?
Yeah. Laura, this isn't necessarily manufacturing related, though it does impact all of us. I'm thinking about industries like e-commerce and last mile fulfillment that are essentially booming, and in one part because of COVID, and we're all at home and we're all ordering online. Do you have any thoughts on the growth of that, or is there a position coming from the state chamber on aiding businesses who are shipping online, or transportation logistics companies? Because that's a major core industry of our region in Northeast Minnesota.
That's a good question. We haven't contemplated that. I mean, really, the way we come at that is more from maintaining good infrastructure, either through broadband, where people are ordering or need to be ordering, or through roads and bridges. But that's something we can certainly hash through. It's not something that's come up yet, so I appreciate you raising it. It's something for us to consider.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. And also, I mean, you brought it up, broadband. I mean, we have a lot of parties and partners locally, economic development, community development, and otherwise, who are working on broadband expansion into our more rural areas, and also working on availability to our core kind of metro areas. It's even difficult for them to get connected sometimes. Do you have any state chamber takes on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's capacity is what everybody wants. And what I think we want to make sure of is if there are some federal funds available for that. So let's, again, access those federal funds first, and then make sure we're not crowding out private sector providers. We want to make sure that it's competitive for them to get in the game. And if it's not competitive, that's where foundation money, public sector money should come in. So it's like a tranching. Federal dollars first. There's a big program at the federal level for broadband. Then encourage the private sector to get in there. And if it's simply not price competitive for them, that's where the state should step in. But I think this remote experience is really going to accelerate people's interest in getting more broadband capacity across the state.
I'll say thank you.
Sure.
Excellent. Well, we're about at our time. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I can end with one. I've got help us settle the debate around the table. Your graphs show that split ticket has become somewhat of a tradition in Minnesota politics. Is divided government generally good for business or bad?
I personally think it's good for business. It kind of keeps the excesses on both sides focused. One more thing that I want to make sure I add is all of you were really helpful for us in getting past during the last special session, the Section 179 expensing, federal conformity. They're going to have another special session coming up here soon, but it is such a huge relief and benefit to business to have that off the table. So thank you for your help on that. I neglected to say that at the top of the hour. Really appreciate your support for getting that done.
So, Well, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, just a lot of thank yous, Laura, and I'll echo that. Thank you for your time here with us today and for sharing your insights on what's going on in Minnesota politics.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate the invitation. It's great to speak with you and see all of you, so thank you.
Thank you. And I'll hand it back over to Wade, I believe.
Yeah, all right, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks,
Wade. I guess we're just going to wrap this up then, and we'll give a thank you to Jim from Fraser Shipyards for his presentation and time, and Jeff at Great River Energy, and Laura at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. We really appreciate you guys taking your time and sharing the information that you did with us today, and hopefully we all gained a little bit from it and can move forward with that. And then we want to thank everybody that did log in and attend the meeting today and putting your voice in there. You're welcome to stay after the meeting here and network if you would like. Otherwise, we're done. So enjoy the rest of your week.